Okay, everyone. Thanks for coming out. For those, this is an optional, lecture, talk, whatever you want to call it. And I'm really excited about this topic. For those that don't know me, I am Trent Harrison. I am the fellowship coordinator, the orthopedic residency coordinator, and a massive nerd. And I think that this might be the nerdiest talk that you're going to hear in a while. But I'm hoping that you're going to take a lot of value from it. So the reason behind this lecture talk, this is not going to be your standard lecture. I'm not going to be, we can stop and pause at any point in time. I might get on a roll, but feel free to do the whole hand up thing and chat, and I'll call on you or talk to you, or let you, voice your opinion. But the reason this kind of came about is because residency is a little bit of a different beast, right? In terms of what it is, and I think that most people in high school and college, they develop certain learning styles and certain ways of getting things done. And maybe those strategies work in college, maybe they don't. Maybe they then work in DPT school, maybe they don't. But when they finally do get into the residency, their old methods might not be as successful. Or it's super successful. They can still get through the residency, but are they taking away everything they need to from the residency? Because it's no longer arbitrary material that you need just to get through the next test. It's now your career, it's your profession, right? So the information you're learning now is the ownership of your profession. And so hopefully you're crazy motivated at this point in time to continue learning, and hopefully the stuff you learn, you hope sticks and that it's applicable and you know how to use it and you can stay on top of the projects that you're actually working on. Okay, so that's sort of what kind of brought this about. When I was pre-residency coordinator, I did most of my focus was obviously on just orthopedics and physical therapy. And then when I became a coordinator, I started really getting into research about learning, and productivity it's a rabbit hole. It is. You can get swept up in the concepts of what's best method for productivity, what's, et cetera, what are the strategies. You can easily get swept up in it, and so hopefully this is giving you some of the highlights. This is also, everyone's process is going to be different depending on what you're into and sort of how your mind works, where your interests lie. And so I'll demonstrate some of my process as we're going, but as long as you understand the principles, you can apply it to whatever process you end up using. Okay, and what I mean by process is how tech-oriented it is versus, it can be very lo-fi in essence. All right, so let's get rolling. So, objectives. What we're going to talk about today is, in essence, why do you need a process first? Like, why does this productivity process, why does it matter? How do you actually start to effortlessly create, right? The goal of this is not to be, in my mind, we have to flip the switch from just rogue learning to you want to actually be a creator mindset, right? You actually want to start thinking as a creator, and that's important. We'll get into why later on, okay? How to Get Things Done philosophy. There's a classic book from, probably the 80s, and it's still, some of the tenets of it hold true today. People have kind of modified it more towards what tech now is available and how to use those principles, but it's a book by David Allen, and it's fantastic, Getting Things Done. Developing a PKM. PKM is it is your project knowledge management system, right? And the PARA method is a method we'll go into. There's a lot of acronyms in this world of productivity, I'm not going to lie. And I think that some of them stick, some of them are catchy. And we'll talk about what they are and what the principles are. It's one of those things that if you've got the base, the concept, the principle, and you start to develop your process, you're good to go. Habit formation. It's one thing to have a process, but if you haven't actually figured out how to hardwire those habits and how to actually develop habits, then it's useless, right? It's going to fall apart because you're never actually going to turn the corner on making it effective. And then how to actually focus, stay on track, and then finally, what I think is incredibly important is how to best learn information. I think that a lot of people have false assumption as what is successful learning methods. And so we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. So those are our objectives. Hopefully by the end of this, we touch on all these. I mean, I have the slides for them, so hopefully we do. And hopefully you retain information about them and you walk away from this with some useful knowledge. All right, so why do you need a process? So once again, I'm super nerdy. So if this analogy doesn't fit with you, then I get it. But in a computer, you've got your hard drive. That's where you actually store your information. But then you've got your RAM, right? Your RAM, for those that don't know, is your random access memory. It's fast access, and it's pretty much like when you're running any program, that program is being run on your RAM. Your RAM is your ability to actually operate programs and move information around. Your hard drive is just where you just store all the raw stuff. A lot of people, unfortunately, think of their brain as a hard drive, and it is not. Your brain is not a hard drive. If you think of your brain as a place to store all the information you can, it's going to fail you, right? That's not what its job is. It's actually much more like RAM. It's going to be working on processing information that's currently available and that it's currently thinking about, but it's not for storing everything under the sun, right? So that's why you have to have a second brain, right? This concept of building a second brain. Okay, your brain is for having ideas, not storing them. Now there is some storing. Obviously, we do learn some stuff, and we want to, store some of the information. But we'll talk about what best methods are for what we do store. For the most part, we don't want to be holding on to information all the time in our heads. We need to make sure that we're putting efforts in the right place. If you're constantly trying to store everything in your head, you're going to fatigue out, and your brain's going to it's going to reboot. It's going to be one of those times where you have to call IT because you're having an issue. So how do we accomplish this? Well, these are some things for how do you actually effectively kind of use your brain. Well, one of the things you have to worry about is willpower issues, or quote unquote ego depletion is the other sort of term for it. And we'll talk about how people drain their willpower and so they can't stay focused, right? Difficulties in developing good habits. We already kind of browsed on that. Organization and memory or retention habits. That's going to fall into those learning concepts. Making time for what's actually important. Concentration, reducing all the noise. There's going to be a lot of noise constantly, especially nowadays with social media, phones, notification dings, the dopamine hits, all of that. I'm sure everyone's already heard about all those things. When you're trying to learn and you're trying to develop a process for completing tasks and projects, you have to manage that because there are a ton of smart people out there that their whole job is trying to hook you and trying to get your attention. Everyone's vying for your attention. If they are succeeding, then you are not doing what you want to do, right? You're not getting done what you're trying to get done. So we have to deal with those distractions. Note-taking. All right, note-taking is huge, and we're going to get into this, and it's a big part of this process of building a second brain. And throughout this, I'm going to be going to an app that I use for note-taking, and we'll talk about it closer to the end, but you'll see it in work because there's portions of this presentation that are ad-lib. I'm going to be bouncing around showing you things, and so we'll see what comes up. And then study learning techniques. All right, so one of the first things to talk about is focused learning versus diffuse learning, and this is still getting the grasp of why do I need a process, okay? So focused learning is I'm actually intentionally thinking about something. Diffuse learning is I'm in a much more relaxed state and sort of information's kind of just, my brain is bouncing around different thoughts, right? There's this great course on Coursera, and I put a bunch of references at the end, that's called Learning About Learning, Learning How to Learn. And what they talk about is that when you have focused learning, they use this pinball analogy, and you have a lot more sort of bumpers out there. And so when your brain is trying to think about something, it's very focused in on that information, and you're holding it. Once again, we're talking about your brain as your random access memory, so it's processing that information, it's trying to hold that information. But that information that you're tapping into is very finite, right? Now say that there was other information in your brain that's relevant, and if you could connect those, that would be wonderful. But when you're focusing all the time, you can't make those jumps, those leaps. Diffuse learning is a much more open-ended state where your brain is able to make leaps and bounds, and jump around, and it has more room to move, right? That's the diffuse learning is the mode in which you're actually going to connect dots, right? Now, what we would call this in the learning sphere is this is a chunk of information. Like all these little data points are kind of chunked together, and so when I think of one, I think of them as a group. And down here might be another chunk, and the question is, how do I connect those, right? Getting into diffuse mode is one way of doing that. Now, there's a lot of different strategies how you get into diffuse mode. This is the kind of thing that when you're in the shower and you have those aha moments, or you're working out and you have those aha moments, you're relaxed, and all of a sudden things start connecting. It's really important to allow yourself to have that space to let your brain rest and make random connections. That's diffuse mode. But when you do have those moments, you have to be able to capture that information. You have to be able to capture that aha moment and put it into your system that you can then process it, right? So there's always this constant bouncing back between I'm focusing on something, I go into diffuse and let kind of things gel, and then I have to focus again, etc. So that's sort of a very big picture of learning methods of the brain, right? All right. So what will limit my ability to use these learning styles? So anxiety is caused by a lack of control, organization, preparation, and action. Okay? Work nowadays, and I thought this was a great quote. I forget who said this one. But in essence, work nowadays, there's no more boundaries. There's no clear boundaries to what work is, right? Because you have email hitting your phone. You have text coming at you. There's no sort of this is work and this is the end of my work. It's a constant stream. And that's not a bad thing per se, but what it does do is it starts to occupy your brain more, and it occupies that RAM, right? You now start using that RAM for other things. You're thinking about things constantly, and so it's sometimes hard to focus and organize your thoughts, right? So what can we do? How do we deal with this? Well, this comes to the concept of open loops, all right? Open loops is, I don't know if he coined the term, but David Allen, who's the guy who has the book Getting Things Done, he talks about open loops. So an open loop is, in essence, some sort of idea or thought that is in your head, anything pulling on your attention, and you don't know where it belongs, you don't know what you're supposed to be doing with it, right? It's occupying your attention, okay? Now, in that course about learning, focus versus diffuse learning, one of the things they talked about is that your brain can only hold 4 chunks of information simultaneously at a time, And then once again, we talk about the fact that the brain is not for storing information, it's for processing, but the processing is limited to, I can only have 4 windows open on my computer at once and actually understand what's happening. If I've got more than that, I've got issues, right? That's what open loops are, okay? If you've got this nagging thought in the back of your head, it's the classic concept of, did I leave the oven on, or did I leave the stove on, did I leave something on? If that's sitting in there in my head, that's occupying space that I could be using to think about anything else, being productive, right? And it's now occupying space, and it's an issue, okay? So this can include big ideas, big to-do lists. It can include tiny ideas, tiny tasks. Anything technically is an open loop, right? Once it's in your brain, it's going to sit in there and fester, okay? So, people think a lot about these open loops, right? We have these tasks or these projects, and people like to think of them, but they don't think about them, right? Meaning that they'll think of, I've got to do this, 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 but they never actually engage that task to actually think about it, to plan it, right? And so that's what happens is it's just a stress inducer. You've got this idea or this project in your head that's very vague, and it's in your head and you think I need to do it, and it's quote unquote an open loop, and it's occupying your mind, and it's a travesty, okay? You're not getting everything done you want to get done. So most stress they experience is inappropriately managed commitments. So it's all about controlling these open loops, right? It's all about how do I control these open loops, and how do I engage in what I actually want to engage in, okay? The reason that something's on your mind, this is that concept of open loop, is that you haven't either clarified it and actually figured out what its intent is. You haven't decided what the actual next action is that you need to take for it. and you haven't put any sort of reminders out there so that you can actually know that it's being handled, know that it's being managed, okay? If you can do those three things with an open loop, then next thing you know, your brain, it's gone, right? It's no longer festering in your brain, no longer taking up CPU, RAM, taking up space, taking up thoughts, okay? All right. So there are 7, I'm a nerd, I already said it, I'm gonna own it. And so these are 7 cognitive biases that suck up time management. This was from an article that I just thought was great. And so I'm going to pop over to this. And so here are these different biases, okay? And so most people have felt these at some point in time. So an urgency bias. This is the idea that something is urgent, and you're going to do the urgent task over something that's not urgent, right? The problem is if we aren't defining what's urgent appropriately in our brains, okay? Email. Every time an email dings, every time a text comes in on your phone, whatever the case is, you might classify that in your head as urgent. I got to deal with that. That's urgent. And so now that is derailing you from whatever it is you're trying to do, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Okay? There's this cool little matrix called the Eisenhower decision matrix. This is just an aside. Once again, just a heads up, I'm going to give you all of these slides so you can comb through them and, figure out what the hell Trump's talking about. And then I'll give you access to some of these other pictures and stuff. So the Eisenhower matrix it's an axis of important versus urgent. Okay, if something is both important and urgent, I need to do that first. I need to do that now. If something's urgent but not very important, if something's important but not very urgent, maybe I put it on the calendar. Maybe I put it on the back burner. I'm going to get to it. If something's urgent but not very important, maybe I can delegate that. Maybe I can figure out what's happening. And then if it's not urgent or important, why are you even thinking about it? Why is it occupying the space in your brain? Delete it, right? We have to be ruthless with the concepts of our efforts and our energy, okay? All right, so that's urgency bias. I'm not going to try to pronounce this. Zeigarnik effect. Anybody? No? I'm guessing it's German. This is the idea that we remember incomplete or interrupted tasks more easily than completed ones. This is open loops. This is the actual sort of like psychology behind open loops, is that if something's incomplete, your brain is going to be festering on it, right? You're always going to be thinking about it. The planning fallacy. So there's 2 things here. One, there's the planning fallacy, and there's another one called the Parkinson's effect, and I'll talk about that in a second too. But the planning fallacy is that we just underestimate time that it's going to take to complete a task, right? This is your procrastination, because you're going to think that, it's not going to take that long. Not to mention that procrastination, in essence, stems from the fact that if you don't like doing something, that's still pain. Oops, I'm getting caught on my... Pain is, they talk about in habit books that you can experience pain. It's not physical pain, but you can still have a pain response to things that are uncomfortable, and certain things that you might not want to do elicit a pain response. And what's our reaction to that? We try and avoid pain. So what do? We put it off. Instead of doing our notes, we go snack and we eat some sugary stuff. We get a dopamine hit. We feel better about ourselves, and then we feel worse later. But it's one of those things that your brain, you're trying to always avoid painful stimulus, right? So we got to learn how to flip the switch so that we don't perceive those things as painful anymore. The Parkinson's effect, which is not on here, is the concept that projects and tasks will consume the time that you give them to take. So if you say that I'm going to take 3 months to write this paper, well, guess what? You're going to take 3 months to write that paper. If you say I'm going to take a week to write this paper, now you're going to complete it, right? We'll talk about also what an actionable goal is at some point in time as well. But it's the idea that the amount of time you give something, you are going to use that time to fill it. So how do you reduce that time? How do you actually think about that task or project in a different light? Okay? Sunk cost fallacy. You gotta know when to cash out, right? The Kenny Rogers song. You gotta know when to hold them. You gotta know when to fold them. Sometimes people, when they've invested a certain amount of resources or time into something, they are committed and they're not pulling back. Metacognition, reflection helps. Sometimes you gotta just give up on a project or a task because it's just not gonna happen, right? But we have a tough time doing that. And then what happens? We're not completing it. It occupies our brain. It's taking up RAM. It's an open loop. You've got an issue, right? Present bias tendency to give stronger weight payoffs to closer present rewards, right? This is probably the biggest issue. This is probably this is the concept of, if I eat a snack right now, it's going to pay off immediately because it's going to give me dopamine, versus if I work out every day for a year, I'm going to feel better in a year. That's a long time away that you're going to get the reward. So in habits, in habit formation, you have to shorten the loop. You have to shorten the reward cycle by creating your own smaller rewards to make the present more pleasurable, right? And so there are tactics for that as well. Complexity bias, keep it simple, stupid, the KISS method. Usually we think things are way more complex than they are, and then we feel that complex things need complex answers. Not necessarily true. It's once again another bias that we have in our brains that we usually use. And the hedonic adaptation, this is the concept that usually you're going to adapt whatever your current status is or your state is. That's going to be your norm. So even if all of a sudden you get your big raise and you all of a sudden get the next big amazing job, and you're super excited and super happy at that moment, well, eventually that's going to be your norm, and it's going to fall back into that's now your norm, and that's the hedonic adaptation. Now, once again, you're back to neutral, right? The way to get over that is to not necessarily focus on goals, but focus on process, enjoying the process, enjoying the actual tasks and the work you're doing, and focusing on that. There's a concept in Japan called Ikigai, which is sort of enjoying that process. There's a great book by Sean Aker called The Happiness Advantage. There's a lot of different ways to have your mind focus on the present and enjoy the present, and not just constantly be goal-oriented, because goals, I think it's in the presentation, I might get ahead of myself sometimes here, I'm not going to lie. Goals are, they're finish lines, and once you hit them, then what, right? There's a moment of, you feel great about hitting the goal, but then if you haven't set up more goals in the future, if you're always chasing happiness in the distance, then you're not possibly happy in the present. You got to enjoy the process, right? Okay. Leverage, not efficiency. Okay. Everyone focuses on efficiency. I should have put a slide in about the master adaptive learner in here, because that's a big term you'll probably hear during the year. Everyone focuses on efficiency, but efficiency is minimizing the effort to get a given impact. Leverage is maximizing the effort or maximizing the impact for a given effort. You need to be focusing on, how do I leverage my time? How do I leverage my energy? And that's where these productivity systems come in handy. And that's where being a creator mindset is going to be beneficial to you, because you're going to see how everything you're learning, you're going to be able to leverage that throughout your future, as opposed to learning it efficiency in the moment and then I'm done with it when I take my quiz or my test and then it's gone. You have to be able to continue to leverage what you're learning, leverage all the projects you're doing. To relate this to the residency, you're going to be doing case reports. You're going to be doing case presentations. If those are quote unquote finish lines where you just complete the task and then it's gone, and you're not leveraging that time and that effort and what you're learning for future projects, for future creations, for other opportunities, then it's wasted. It's, in my brain, it would be a wasted effort, right? Got to use it. Okay. Process over goals, we kind of already touched on that. Goals, they're finite. What happens when they end? Your success also hinges on goals when you focus on goals. So if you don't complete the goal, you feel terrible, right? So that's not fun. So you need to have a process that in itself is rewarding, because now, as long as you're continuing the process, you feel good about it. You're enjoying the work. If you don't hit that goal, maybe another goal opens up. Maybe a greater outcome or a greater opportunity comes about. You're also not limiting yourself. If you're focusing on the process and your goal all of a sudden turns out to be, you lowbarred it, then you might realize that, I can do a lot more. I just continue my process. This is Atomic Habits, James Clear. It's a great book. Once again, there's a slide at the end with just a ton of books if you want to go through and read them. When you fall in love with the process rather than the product, you don't have to wait to give yourself permission to be happy. I think that's huge, right? Especially over this next year, there's going to be a lot of projects, but every one of those projects, I'm telling you, is rewarding in its own right if you enjoy the process behind completing those projects, right? That's important. Motivation. There's a great book called Motivation is a Myth, all right? I put this on here because I think that a lot of times people, they try to just hammer through things. They've got a project they're going to do, it's their goal, and they just try to power through it, and they think that they need to motivate themselves to accomplish that task. The problem is motivation is a feeling. And the guy who wrote the book is much more blunt. He says that, if you're just reacting and using feelings to drive everything you're doing, then you're a child. And you need, parents can overcome, or adults can more overcome and control their feelings to a degree. But the idea is that motivation is a feeling, and if we always rely on a feeling or this assumption that I have to feel like I'm going to accomplish this work, well, then you're probably not going to do it, right? Or it's going to be hard to do it. You develop a process that you enjoy. You shorten that feedback loop so that along the way you're enjoying that process, then you're not going to need motivation to, tackle something, right? This is the concept. So in Atomic Habits, they talk about 3 different sort of like tiers of information, right? That's probably the wrong term, but we'll come back to it. You have outcomes. You can think about controlling your life just based on the outcomes, and these are the results, right? These are what you get, right? These are what you get, and these are goals, and we already talked about using that as your like North Star. That can be a problem, right? You could focus on the process, which are your routines and your workflow. These are the actual things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then the final thing you can focus in is on your identity, because it's your beliefs, your bigger picture, my passions, my purpose. If you focus in on that and you shift your identity, well, now it doesn't take as much effort to do the projects and the process because you have an identity that's involved in doing those things, right? Now, the problem is that how do you establish an identity? And I can tell you that I've read a lot of books on this, and I've tried to do these exercises, and they're not easy, right? I've gone through the Grit book that talks about, like, it has this hierarchy of, purpose, and you try and create this hierarchy of purpose. I tried to create mine. It was a disaster. Happiness Advantage, trying to understand your calling versus your job versus your career. There's some good strategies in there. And then Atomic Habit, this is the one that had the outcomes versus process versus identity. And he really talks about if you get your identity solid, then everything else falls into place, right? So it's a wonderful sentiment, and my goal is to still get there. I want to do those things. The problem is that what David Allen says, and what you'll find a lot of times, is that in order to be able to have those long retrospective metacognitive sit downs with yourself to create that identity or that purpose, you actually have to have the time to do it. And in today's culture, in today's clickbait culture, streams of information, everyone vying for your attention, it's hard to carve out that time to do it unless you get control of all of those tasks and projects that are just overwhelming you, right? So he talks about bottom-up approach. He talks about, let's get control of all your tasks and all your projects and how you manage all this other stuff to free up the time for you to actually then start thinking about these bigger picture concepts. And that way you can get there, but you have to manage the wave of information and the wave of responsibilities that are just crashing into your face constantly, right? So you have to be able to manage that. All right. So, being a creator, right? Do I need to pause? Any questions about this so far? Because I can just go. I can just start rolling. Any questions? Looks good? All right, we're rolling. Effortless output. This is a term coined. It's coined in this sort of note-taking sphere of productivity, right? There's this group of people that really focus in on how you turn your knowledge and your information that you're getting into actual content, right? Because this is what we'll go into here. I knew I had something in here. Because the idea is that if you can create content, you're turning your knowledge into value, and by creating, that truly means you're understanding, right? So what does it mean to be a creator? You have to borrow, right? There's the coinage that nothing really is new ideas. They're sort of rearranged ideas or repurposed ideas. And you got to be okay with that. Like that's wonderful. Most blogs out there, there are people that are making tons of cash with a blog, and that blog or that newsletter is just repackaged information, but it's insightful still, right? It's insightful information because it's repackaged in a way that maybe now resonates with you, right? So be cool with borrowing creativity, repurposing and resurfacing sort of information. I do that constantly. Everything that I've learned in physical therapy, I've learned from mentors, and now I am taking that information and repackaging it and teaching it to my residents, right? If you're in my residency, if you've done my residency, you know, and maybe if you haven't done my residency yet, you've heard, if you're going to do the residency, I'm really into algorithms. And I'm really into visual mind maps of information. I didn't create any of that information that's in the mind map, right? All that stuff that's in the algorithm and in the mind map, that was created by someone else. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and I'm trying to reorganize that information for myself, and then I put it out there, right? So borrow information. Oh, idea recycling. Already talked about that. That's pretty much what we just said right there. Projects. You need to think of everything moving forward as a project, right? And I think previous mindset, that would be negative. We think of projects as maybe a negative thing. I think there's certain spheres that think of projects as exciting things. Like if you think of like more handyman, woodworkers, they think of projects as, oh, this is cool, I got a project to work on. If you're coming from a student mindset, projects might be like, ugh, I've got a project, especially if it's a group project. I got to work with a team and blah, blah, blah. But I think that projects should be exciting because it's through, if you learn via a project, you probably see it with capstones, case-based learning. If you learn through a project, you're giving that information context. And context is king when it comes to, or queen, when it comes to learning, okay? Context is incredibly important when it comes to learning. That's how you're actually going to get information to make sense to you. Slow burns. It's okay to have lots of projects going simultaneously. We're going to talk about the project management system aspect of things, and that's going to mean that you're always moving forward on projects, right? The problem is if you've got lots of projects currently open and you don't have a way of tracking them, that means you have all those open loops in your head, which is then giving you anxiety, right? But if you're managing the projects, and then you can have lots of projects going simultaneously, because you shouldn't be doing what's called like a heavy lift, right? A heavy lift is the idea of, I'm just going to knock out this project this weekend, right? That's incredibly draining, not to mention that you're probably not going to get as much from that project and from that learning experience. So you want to have lots of burners going, and you want to have kind of a slow burn process. Heavy lifts are bad. You only know what you make. To teach is to know, to create is to understand. I love that quote. I think that was Tiago Forte. Keep your ideas moving. This is the idea that if you create a project during this year, like case presentation, case report, and that information stops there, period, I'm done with it, moving on to the next project. If you're never touching that information again, it's useless. It's no longer helpful to you. Why did you do it in the first place? You want to take that information. You always want to be kind of back to recycling ideas. You always want to bring ideas back together and try and connect things, right? So the big question is, you hear all this stuff and you're like, this sounds great. I'm on board. Maybe you're on board, maybe not on board. But it's how do I manage that, right? How do I now get into a system of management so that I can feel like I'm able to accomplish those things, okay? So let's get into getting things done, all right? This is now getting into the idea of how do I actually complete the work. So David Allen wrote this book, Getting Things Done. It's a fantastic book. You probably don't have to read it because I can tell you right now that there's a ton of YouTubers that talk about a lot of these concepts. And you could go look at someone on YouTube, probably like Tiago Forte, and once again, I'll put some names at the end. But there's a ton of YouTube productivity sort of quote-unquote gurus who are, once again, they're creators who are recycling ideas and repackaging them, but that is moving forward their own thought process by doing that. And so the main concept here is that you want to capture, clarify, organize, reflect, and engage. These are the 5 steps of getting things done, okay? It's a very simple system that you can apply it in multiple different ways, right? You can use all kinds of tech or not, right? You can go hi-fi, lo-fi. So let's start with, I love this, obviously. Once again, I'm an algorithm guy, so I love algorithms. If you show me an algorithm, show me an image, I'm hooked. I don't care what it is. My tech who knew this way back when I was working at Fleming Island, which is a clinic and outpatient here, he actually came up with an algorithm, because he knew I liked algorithms. He came up with an algorithm for how to get food from patients, how to get a patient to bake you food and bring it in. And it was this hilarious algorithm. Every time it just pointed back to send them to Brian, send them to Brian, send them to Brian. So it was do this, now tell them to talk to Brian. Do this. So anyways. So this is the algorithm for getting things done, okay? You've got all this stuff that you want to deal with. What am I going to do with it, okay? So let's talk first about how to get the stuff into a basket, right? This is the idea of capturing. This is where you're going to save. If you just did this, right, to a degree, if you just did this, your sanity would increase dramatically, okay? Because the idea here is that open loops are in your brain, like we talked about, and they're just sitting there and they're taking up space, and it's a real pain in the butt, and you're not able to actually think, okay? By taking that information, whatever that project is, whatever that thought is, whatever that thing is, I want to read that article, or I want to watch that YouTube video, whatever it is, by taking that and either writing it down or taking the URL and saving it somewhere, your brain equates that to completing of the task. Our brains, as smart as we are also incredibly simplistic in their nature. And that if by just taking that information and putting it somewhere, you've probably felt this way when you're doing like a handwritten to-do list. Like the second you write out your to-do list and you're like, these are the things I need to do, there's a calmness that kind of like, okay, because that was capturing. That was putting it on paper, and now your brain doesn't have to hold it anymore, because our brains are not for holding information, they're for processing information. So just by putting it somewhere, now your brain is relaxing, right? That's capturing, right? So it's okay to have multiple buckets to capture in. The fewer you can have, the better. And we'll talk about what that, I've got some apps that I'll show you in just a second, because I want to make this somewhat more interactive. You can see my process, but the fewer buckets you have that you're capturing within, the better. But it's okay to still have a diversity of buckets that you're kind of throwing stuff into. You must empty these buckets, these inboxes. They're typically called inboxes. You want to empty these inboxes regularly. I try and empty my inboxes every 1 to 2 days. I do a weekly review, which we're definitely going to talk about because it's crucial, and they're going to get done at my weekly review no matter what, okay? The problem is that most people, maybe they start to capture, but they start to just jam, they just never manage that inbox. It just becomes this explosion of capturing. Your email is technically an inbox, right? And how many people have an iPhone where it has like 16,000 like red number, and it's just like I gotta be quiet. My wife has that. It gives me heart palpitations. I open her phone and I weep, and I think, because to me that's anxiety inducing. Okay, because to me that's a ton of open loops. That's like what's going on. So I thought it was interesting also that there was, I forget who. I don't remember who made this point, but it was the concept that we used to live in a society of containers and now we're in a society of streams. What that means is that, a little bit more early internet days, maybe even pre-internet days, when you went to class, you got a textbook. Here's the book you're supposed to read. It was very, like, here are the notes for your class, and it was very finite. Here's this container of information. Okay, I can do this, great. But now it is constant streams of information. you can go on PubMed and type in something you're going to look up, and all of a sudden you get thousands of articles. And when we see that stream of information, and our brains were previously wired at completing, I need to read all of that to then feel good. That's a problem, right? You need to manage those streams of information, and you're going to become more of a curator, right? You're going to become a little bit more ruthless on what it is I'm taking in, what I'm not taking in, because if you don't, you're going to get swept away, right? So, capturing. Here are a bunch of apps, okay? So, if you are on iOS, which is probably a ton of you on iOS, Things, this is called Things 3, right? I'll put it in here. Things 3. Things 3 is iOS-based to-do list. It's really solid program. The one next to it, the red one, this is for people that are more Android. This is called Todoist. I have an Android phone and a PC, so I use Todoist. Things is fantastic, though, so wonderful. A lot of people probably know this. This is Evernote. Once again, it's another place you can capture information. Google Keep. These two right here, this is called Pocket, and this is called Instapaper, right? What these are wonderful at is that if I have an article that I'm wanting to read, I can use one of those to just capture it. So let's see if this happens. There's this Nest Labs is this great little blog. She is I think she was a neuro PhD or something like that. So let's say I'm in here, or let's say I didn't go here, because obviously if I'm going to the website, that's where I'm directing my time. But say I'm doing something and all of a sudden this pops up, a link to this, and I'm interested in it, right? So I want to capture this. If I read this right now, I'm derailed. I'm no longer doing what I was going to do, right? This happens a lot when you open your phone, you see something, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. And then next thing you know, you're down a rabbit hole of reading, right? So say I want to capture this. So I could capture this a couple different ways. I've got all these extensions up here. Instapaper, if I click on this, it saves it to my Instapaper. Well, if I was logged in, it would save it to my Instapaper. And then all of a sudden, Instapaper is like a personal newspaper of all the articles that I want to read. All of a sudden, I feel that desire to read this, that urge that I need to read this right now, gone, right? Another thing I can do, so here's, once again, this is just talking about there are different ways of capturing. This is a product called Notion. I do that, it's saved in my Notion, we'll get back to that later, and it's gone. Or I could throw it right into Todoist. I can say, okay, I think I can throw it into Todoist. Usually I don't, because usually I use articles. Usually I use Instapaper or Pocket for articles, but I could if I wanted to throw it into Todoist, okay? So these are great for just saving articles, and you can organize them in different ways. Notion, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Kindle, I read all my books on Kindle app. I used to be a diehard paperback hardcover book because, you know, you like the smell, you like having the library, you like collecting things, and you go, oh, look at what I've read, you know, you show it off to people that come over, look, I'm well read. I love books, I do. But then I got into this sort of productivity world, and Kindle, I can highlight things, and immediately I can save it into my apps that I actually do my notes in. So now that information, instead of I read a book, and then I put that book on the shelf, and I've forgotten everything that I read about that book, or I have to try and use my brain once again as a hard drive of information, it's not going to happen. Whereas if I have a way of, I capture that information and it goes into some sort of repository that I can continue to use and repurpose, fantastic, right? This is an app called, what's it called? I just heard about this one. It's called Liner, capital Liner. What's great about this is that it allows you to, let's go back to Nest Labs. It's a pretty cool concept. In essence, you can highlight anything, and then it saves it into a bucket of highlights for you on the internet, right? So it's an extension that then I could have, you know, anytime I want to just highlight directly on my page, now that highlight's saved in Liner, and I can just leave it, right? So think about that for if you read articles on your computer. One, you could save the articles, you know, from PubMed somewhere, or you could just use Liner and just boop, 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 that's the information I like, done, right? So this is what I mean by you're reducing, you're closing loops. You're capturing all the information you want. Now, What I will say is that it's very seductive to become a captured junkie, that you start just capturing everything. And you just because all of a sudden you think in this collector mindset. And I have a very bad collector mindset. And next thing you know, you're trying to just collect everything because you're like, oh, it's all going to be useful someday. And then you're getting bogged down in this capture and you're not actually creating, right? The goal is to create. The goal is to use the information. If you're constantly capturing, that means you're probably procrastinating from actually doing, right? And so you have to use. You want to create. So you have to be judicious and sort of rigid in what you're actually taking in. Okay. All right. So that's capture. We've now captured it. It's going into some inbox of some sort, and we might have multiple inbox, but we're trying to use those to our advantage. Then what is that? What is it now? What do I do with this? Okay. You now clarify it. And the main question you're asking yourself is this an actionable thing? Right? Is this actionable to me? Right? And what actionable is there some sort of project or outcome that is involved with this? Is this actually doing something for me? So a great example would be like if it were an actual task that you were given, like I've got to pick up milk. I've got to, write this case report. Those are actionable, goal-oriented outcomes, right? If it's, an article that I just think is cool, I mean, the action is to read it, but that's not really an action, right? But it's not moving towards some sort of outcome or project of some sort. Like I'm not using it immediately. So we'll come back to that, what that means. So first I have to say, is it actionable? Is this project or does this have some sort of outcome? Then I have to clarify what's the next action I have to take, right? So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to pop into this example because I think this is important. So this is Todoist. And let's say I created this project of here's a repository of projects for residency curriculum, right? And let's say one of my projects is, let's go into assignment, and one of my projects is case report, right? Case report 1. If I create case report 1 and I say the next action is complete case report, I say, yeah, my next action for this is to complete the case report 1. That is horrible because that's too big. Your brain is going to melt because it's too big of a thing, right? It doesn't mean anything to me, right? Whereas instead, if my clarifying process is to figure out what the next action, so maybe your next action is identify a patient, but maybe that's too big because what does that mean, right? So that's even too big. So maybe I say my next action is every day I forgot that it does that. Every day I develop a PICO question about a patient. And that is my next action, right? Now that's tangible, right? Because that's going to be starting to lead me towards finding a patient. So then after that, hopefully from that, I then find a patient. And then maybe down the line, it's like, research. I specifically put research articles for this, research articles for that. I make very tangible, actionable goals as opposed to big global goals that don't have an action associated with them and that are too massive because then your brain is going to completely fry. It doesn't matter. So now I have this nice actionable goal of, I'm going to develop a PICO question. I can develop that, and that might even become a habit for me, which would be excellent. So let's take away this. Let's come up here and take away this tag because this is no longer our next goal. This is sort of our big project that we're working on. Here's my next actual actionable goal. Perfect. Next action. Got it. So I have to make a project that I have to make sure it's actionable. I ask myself if it's actionable and I create a next goal. The next action, this goes back to that concept of urgent or important. If I create that there is a next action, I then ask myself, is it going to take less than 2 minutes to do this? If it is, just do it. Just immediately just do it, right? So when you're going through and processing, at some point in time, you're going to have this inbox, and then you're going to say, all right, it's time to go through my inbox and clarify everything. You first say, is this actionable? If it is, okay, let's figure out what the next action for it is. If the next action takes less than 2 minutes, just do it immediately. Don't put it off. Just go ahead and knock it out, right? If it's going to take more time, then the question is, do I need to do this? Or do I need to delegate it? Do I need to give it to someone else to do? And if it's something that I need to do and it's going to take longer than 2 minutes, I need to defer it, meaning that it's going to go into my next action list, right? So I still know where it exists. I know what the next action is for that task, and I'm going to get to it. So let's go back to this example. So say this, every day I develop a Pico question. Say that is something that I don't want to do right now. It's going to take more than 2 minutes, and I'm not in the clinic. There's no patients here. How am I going to, really start to develop a Pico question? So what I do is I say, yep, okay, I'm going to give this some sort of priority, right? You can figure out your own sort of priority sort of angle. If you're using the Eisenhower matrix, maybe this is urgent and important. This is important but not urgent. You figure it out however you want to. This is, once again, the principles are there in terms of you use the principles, right? So now what's nice is I close this project, okay? And then so this is my tags. I've got a lot of random tags. You'll see how I organize my life, where in essence, these are different buckets that exist in my world. And what I do is that when I do a weekly review, I click on these and I find out what are the next things I need to be doing to move projects along, right? That's it. So if I come here and it's time to figure out what I'm doing this week and I click on this, it's filtered, it's figured out what's my next project or what's my next action for a project. And I go, oh yeah, I gotta do this. So maybe I'll assign this now to Friday, right? Or I'll say, I'll do this today, right? And so now it's today. And so what that's gonna do is it's gonna go on to my today. So it's less cognitive load for me to figure out what's happening next, right? So you're going to figure out if something's actionable. Does it have an outcome? Then you're going to say, is this action less than 2 minutes? Okay, I'm going to do it. If not, am I the right person for it? I am. All right, let's figure out when I'm going to do it. I'll assign it some sort of date, or I'll just throw it into my next action list. And every week, when I kind of review my next action list, I can prioritize if that's something I want to do this week or not. Simple as that, right? So that gives you into, is this actionable? Yes. Does it have a project? Well, if it does, I need to determine what that project is and come up with the next action. Once I know there's a next action, I'm either going to do it, I'm going to delegate it, or I'm going to defer it. Deferring is either I'm going to put it on the actual calendar and say I'm doing this Tuesday, or I'm going to put it into a list of next actions so I know what are the things I'm supposed to be moving. Okay? Does that make sense? So your system is going to be offloading the cognitive load, right? The idea is that cognitive load of trying to hold this information of what am I doing today? You don't want that. You want to have a nice sit-down weekly review and you say, these are the things I'm going to knock out this week. It's all manageable. I've figured it out and I'm moving, right? And they are the things that are the next step in these projects that I want to actually do. What if it's not actionable? I'm glad that I put all these prompts in here because sometimes I don't know where I'm going next. So this is good. Thank you, past Trent. I appreciate it. The next thing is you want to organize it, right? So if it's not something that's actionable, you now want to do something with that. So this might be that article. I saved that article earlier. Let's show you an inbox, right? So I threw it in Notion. So here's a Notion inbox. So once again, this is just as a, we'll get into this a little bit more, but you'll see here, where was it? You'll see here in projects that I have these very specific personal, family, health, these buckets. We call these areas, right? And you'll see that those are paralleled here also in Notion. I keep it all organized, and if I went to OneDrive, which is another bucket that I use, you'll see that, once again, same type of buckets, right? I'm storing information in certain areas of my life. Depending on the information, depends on where it's going. That's all, okay? So here I am. Here's that article. It got sent to me. Great, it's sitting in my inbox, and now I'm gonna try and process this information. Ooh, chocolate peanut butter mug cake. That sounds nice right now. Okay, so here's my inbox, and I'm gonna process this information. So what are the things I gotta do, right? If it's not actionable, either I'm gonna trash it, and I'm gonna say, what was I thinking when I captured that? I don't need a peanut butter mug cake right now. What am I doing with my life? Or I'm going to incubate it, meaning that it doesn't need an action now, but maybe it's going to be a project later in life, but not yet. Not yet, right? Or I'm going to just store it. It's going to be some sort of reference material that now I have for the future. So to show you how simple this can be, I can come in here, and I think of Notion. This is a place for just storing information for me. So I know that if I sent it here, I'm storing it. So I come in here, I say, this is chocolate peanut butter mug cake. I go to cookbook, boop, it's gone, right? It's taken it and it's thrown it in my cookbook. I don't have to think about it. This one, this is probably health because it has to do with enjoying life. So I'll put it in health. Hunt, gather, parent. If anyone's a parent or thinking about being a parent, this book is very interesting. And so I'm going to put that in family. Right? And so this is how quickly I can touch these, and I know that they're there, right? Now, say one of these things I actually want to do something about, right? Say one of these things I actually want to use, like this one here. Well, maybe instead, because I'm like, well, you know what? I actually want to read that. So I'll do it a different way. I can come in here. I can highlight this link. I can come back to my to-do list, and I can come in here and I can say, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and create a task. And I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to say, watch this video for PhysioNexus. PhysioNexus is a website that I kind of create. And as quickly as this, I can say this is a PhysioNexus 2.0 project. It's a next step. It is priority 2, we'll say. I don't know. And then I save it, right? And you'll see that it disappears from here. It's not in my inbox because it's actually in the project, right? And if I went to my... If I came in here and I was doing my, searching of this, I would see that it would be added. It's actually not in this one, it's in a different one. But I would see that it would go into the next bucket so that I would be referencing that information. And so I don't have to think about it anymore. I know that at some point in time when I'm doing my weekly review and I'm looking at what are the things I need to accomplish, it's going to show up as a next step as a watch, and I'm going to say, I'm not going to do it this week, I'll do it later, right? So it's managing that. Or I trash it, right? Or it's something that I'm like, I didn't need this, so I trash it. So that's the concept of organizing the information once you actually have put it into your inbox and into your system, right? So that's over here. So that's the entire algorithm, right? I have stuff, it comes into an inbox, maybe I've got a couple inboxes. I then figure out, is it actionable? Okay. Is it related to a project? Do I just do it? Do I delegate it? Do I need to put it into some sort of next action list? Or do I put it on my calendar because it's something I need to do because it has a deadline? If it's not actionable, I'm either going to trash it, I'm going to add it to a reference area that I can gather that information later, or it might become a back burner, an actual back burner project that I want to work on one day, which would be pretty awesome too. So the final two things, which are reflect and engage, we're going to pause on those. So in the getting things done method, it was capture, clarify, organize. Then you reflect and you engage, right? Before we get into reflect and engage, we're going to talk about building your actual sort of system, your rig of productivity apps or whatever you're going to use, okay? So this is the idea of you want to have areas where you actually work on projects. You want to have areas where you're storing information. And you want to have areas where you can actually think within them, okay? Now, depending on who you are, you're going to use different apps for different stuff, right? You might completely think differently than I do or look at information differently than I do. But this is the principles, is that you want to have an area that you're storing your projects and that you actually work on them there. You want to have an area where you're just having the raw data, reference information, final products, etc. stored. And you want to have an area that you actually think within. My dad... He uses, oops, I clicked. It's okay. Kick that back. My dad, he uses PowerPoint as like a journal. Like he has so many PowerPoints open and he just uses PowerPoint as his thinking space. Once again, heart palpitations, but good for him. He's got that. I'm happy that he uses it, but oh man, that would be tough for me. But I know other colleagues that have done that as well. So Tiago Forte, who's this sort of productivity guru, he actually coined the term building a second brain. It's an actual online course. It's wicked expensive. So I have never taken it, but he writes a lot about it and he YouTubes a lot about it. I have no doubt that it would be incredibly rewarding to take that course, but it's like, I don't have that kind of cash. he breaks down the para method, right? This is when you're thinking about these principles, right? He breaks it down into this nice little acronym of you have an area for projects, you have your areas of your life which your projects sit within, you have your resources, which are the stuff you're actually using for those projects, and then you have your archives, right? Which is where you just store stuff. Right? These are sort of like the principles. If you looked up the para method on YouTube, you would find tons of different ways people do things. So if I were to look here in Notion, these would be areas of my life. Within them might be actual like projects, right? So here's, workouts, longevity stuff. And so then if I clicked on those, in those would be, maybe the resources would be stored there, right? Or for me, I store my resources usually like if it's like hard files, like finances or, pictures or things like that, I throw those into OneDrive. Other people use Evernote because Evernote has a wonderful optical reading optionality to the program, which for those that don't know what optical reading is that if I take a picture of something and I put it in Evernote and I search, Evernote will read the picture and find those words on the receipt. And so therefore maybe you don't need as much structure behind like how you're storing it. You just throw it in there, right? So that can be appealing to some people. So you want to have these sort of areas. There's another guy who his name is Ali Abdaal. He's a big YouTuber, and he came up with what he calls the lazy system. And the lazy system for him stands for you have your lash, which is your calendar, and you put everything on your calendar. You time block everything, that it's keeping you on point. You have your to-do list, which is your agenda. And we kind of already showed how you can use the getting things done method in a to-do list to help you move projects along. Zettelkasten's, this is your area for thought. The final part of this presentation is all about Zettelkasten method and quote-unquote smart notes. I can't talk highly enough about it. And then you have your storage, once again, your inventory. So you can use either of these kind of frameworks. They're the same thing in essence, that you have an area for projects. Where am I actually doing the work on these projects? How am I managing my time with a to-do list or an agenda list of some sort? Where am I storing final products and information, resources? And then where do I actually possibly do my thinking, right? So this brings us to what type of brain are you? This is to give you some help on like, how do you resonate with how you approach applications and projects and how you think, okay? So this was in the productivity world, this was a big meme for a little while in terms of like, it sounds super nerdy. In terms of like how do different people think? It's almost like a personality quiz, right? And the idea was that you could be a librarian, a gardener, or an architect, right? And these have different sort of philosophies kind of behind them. The librarian, you like very linear, hierarchical sort of structure. You're a gatekeeper for that information. You're putting it in very organized fashion. It's based on subjects, et cetera, right? So these apps, OneNote and Evernote, they can be really good for that kind of thing. Like if you're a very structured librarian sort of mindset, right? The gardener is you just want to connect data. It's you're throwing seeds out there, stuff's going to grow. You're going to figure out what's growing where and what worked, what grew nicely, what didn't. It's a very bottom-up approach in terms of you're just gathering information and starting to connect it, and then next thing you know, projects kind of come from that, right? I can tell you that I am a gardener of sorts, and this presentation is literally that. And I'll show you how that came to be. I'll show you in a program how that kind of came for me. These are the 3 apps that are good for this. This is called Roam Research. I'll type these out. I'll type left to right, so here through so far. So you have Evernote, you have OneNote, you have Roam Research. Roam Research is expensive, not gonna lie. I have a free copy of it because I got in the beta, but some people I know still pay for it, but some people think it's a little pricey. You have Obsidian, which is that purple rock, and then you have RimNotes. I have a resident using RimNotes this year, and they absolutely love it, right? And we'll talk about what these apps do and why these are really cool for someone who's a gardener when we get to Smart Notes, okay? And the final one is Architect. Notion's a great one for this, but there's other applications, I'm sure. But this is more, you have pages that sort of can nest within each other. It's much more database driven. Notion, what you see here that I showed you before, this is a database, right? This is a database of information that I can see, and I can view this database in different ways. So I threw something in that cookbook earlier. I can just look at this from a cookbook standpoint, and now I see all of my cookbook, right? Some people love this kind of concept where it's very data-driven, mindset, right? I'm structuring how I want to view it. I will warn you that Notion is amazing. I love it, but you can easily get into this. It's so fun to build stuff in it that next thing you know, you're starting to where's a good picture? You're starting to put pictures and icons, and you're starting to go crazy in sort of how it looks, and et cetera, et cetera. It can become a train wreck. Like you can start procrastinating very easily in terms of, I want this to look, I want it to feel the way I want it to feel, which is fantastic. But it also can be a time sink if you start getting down that road, right? I love Notion. If I could, I would do everything in Notion, but there are some things that I can't do in Notion, and so I do them elsewhere. Simple as that. And it's okay. You can have multiple programs that do different things, right? So I use Notion for certain things. I use other programs for others. All right. So I already kind of did a demo of a capture. So I kind of got ahead of myself. But in essence, these are the apps that I use personally. Once again, this is OneDrive, which is a Microsoft product. Notion you've seen. Todoist you've seen. That was my to-do list. We haven't seen Roam Research yet, but we'll get there. My Kindle app, where I take actual highlights and I put them in here, and then Gmail. I try and route everything to Gmail. We have Outlook at Brooks, but I usually just take all the emails and I ship them over to Gmail. The reason is, I'll show you that right now. Hopefully there's nothing crazy embarrassing in here, is that if I have my inbox, so this is my inbox for Gmail. That's it. That's my inbox. Because what I do a lot of times is I set up filters, and I set up things that are going to make sure that I'm not being overwhelmed with information. This can be as much of... Email is probably like the biggest time suck. It was an invention that's wonderful and it's in certain ways, but it also has killed productivity in other ways, right? So I schedule the time I go into my email. I get in, I get out, right? And the idea is that when I get in, I'm using that method of I'm either deferring it, delegating it, doing it immediately, or scheduling it for later, right? So let's see an example here. Own It. This is a food product, health food product company giving me a 50% off. Great. Maybe I like that. So maybe I unsubscribed. I'm like, done. I'm never going to see it again. But maybe I like this company. And so instead, I could filter this. I could create a filter, say skip my inbox, so archive it. And then I want to throw it in promotions. There we go. I'm never going to see that again now, right? So now, anytime Own It comes into my inbox, it's going to go straight to promotions. And so say later on, I'm like, you know what? I wonder if there's anything in Own It. I can just search it. If I get the hankering, I could search for it, and it's going to find it because it's in my archives, right? But it's not going to waste my time anymore, right? What's another example? So another thing is, so a buddy of mine was asking about fellowship questions. We've already completed this conversation, but say I wanted to answer this, I wanted to talk to him. But I don't want to do it right now. So this is going to take more than 2 minutes. I've got a Todoist icon here. I click it. Fellowship questions. Roy, P1. This is important. I'll do it tomorrow. Done. Right? And then I just archive it. And what that does, I don't know why I said it like that, what that does is that now if this were upcoming tomorrow, that's going to come up in my to-do list. And not only that, but if I click on it, it's going to take me straight to that email. I don't have to see my inbox, which might suck me into another world of pain, right? So it's about leveraging your time and making sure you're not getting sucked into places. You also see that what happens is when I complete a task, like if I come in here I don't need to know about this. I don't care about this. I'm just going to delete it. You'll see that it doesn't take me back to my, oh, that one did. But if I was down here, usually what happens is if I've got my inbox and I click something, it just takes me straight to the next email. It doesn't come back to my inbox to see everything. I just boom, 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 knock them out, get done with it, right? You'll see here's newsletters, and it has 39. Once again, I subscribe to a ton of newsletters. I don't want to see them because I don't want them to draw me in. If I click on this, I'll see them. They're all getting archived and given the tag newsletter. So maybe I sit down and I'm like, you know what, I just want to read some stuff, see what's out there. I come in here, I look around, oh, that's interesting. But when I'm actually touching my email to get work done, I don't want to see them, right? So this would normally be empty. I left it so that we could use this as an example, right? To show you sort of what the process hopefully starts to look like when you touch, done, throw it in my to-do list, throw it in the next step. Okay, I spent my 15 minutes of email, whatever it is, and that's it for the day, right? Hopefully. So that's an example of like Gmail, right? Heath, I'll show you that. To be honest, it was one of those things that it was, he's asking about in the chat about how do you make it so it goes from one email to the next. There's a feature somewhere, and there was some guy that had tips on YouTube on how to create a more uniform Gmail process. He talked about the filters. He talked about that stuff, right? And so that's where I got it. And it was super helpful. All right. This takes us to reflect. You need to have a weekly review, right? I talked about if you can daily knock out those inboxes and give that information tasks, great. You don't have to do it daily. You don't want them to build up though, right? So maybe you do it every other day, something. But once a week, you have to have a sit down and you actually have to go through your system and you have to see what are the things I need to prioritize, what do I need to clean up, what do I need to get to next, etc. And you should have a process for this weekly review, right? It should be a process of some sort, and it's uniform. You do it every time, right? Here are a couple of examples of weekly reviews. This one over here is, I think this is Tiago Forte. He talks about the first thing you do is you go through your email box, and there's a nice uniformity to this in terms of I go through my emails, and either I'm going to be throwing things into tasks or getting rid of them. I go through my calendar, I look at what's coming up, what I've gone through. I clean off my desktop, my downloads. I go through my notes and I throw things from my notes into my tasks again as well. And then finally I get to my tasks because everything else should have either become tasks and now I'm looking at all my tasks or everything's been deleted, right? Same thing here. If you look at this is, I think this is David Allen's, the Getting Things Done. He tries to clear out his email first. He empties his head. What's really cool about that, that's not something I do. I think it's a cool concept, but if I come in here, once again, I've got everything kind of saved up so I know where things are. This is the David Allen sort of list of things. It's hard to read, but in essence, these are prompts. Let me just expand it. It's fine. These are prompts that he gives where it's like you quickly read through this and you think, does it stimulate anything that's going to make me jot it down, because it helps you prompt your brain to just dump stuff from my brain. Have I been thinking about travel? Have I been thinking about anything with the bank? Nope. And you just see if it just prompts. It's not something you're lingering on. It's not like a journal. It's what's been in the back of my brain that I haven't been thinking about. It's more subconscious, but it's taking up real estate. These prompts of personal and professional hopefully get that to the surface enough that I can then capture it. And then it's gone, right? So that's this idea here of emptying your head. This is currently the process I do. So what I do is I clear my inbox, I look at my calendar real quick. This whole process takes maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes. I clear my physical inbox and notebook. So that to me is like, if I have actually handwritten stuff, I clear my computer, I delete stuff. I don't need things just clogging stuff up. I look over my budget. That's important for me, for the family. I've got to manage I manage the budget in the household, so it's important for me to check that out weekly. I process Notion. I prioritize any of the open loops that I've had, and then I start choosing my tasks for the week. This should say, not today, right? And I check my waiting on. So what's really cool is that what I'll do is say I complete a task. Let's do this one again. This is tomorrow. We'll say it's today. It's fine. We'll give it no date. It's not a problem. And let's say that I did this, right? I can now say I am waiting on him to respond, right? I could just say something as simple as that. I have now a little tag over here for what are the projects I'm waiting on. And so on my weekly review, I click on that and I say, who am I waiting on? What am I waiting on? Oh, yep. I gotta let me double check with Roy because he hadn't gotten back to me, right? So that might be part of your weekly review is you have some sort of waiting on list, but you have a way of tracking it so you're not just trying to like hold it all the time, right? And then finally you engage, okay? The act of choosing what to do, what to work on. There's a couple of different processes here in terms of like, you saw how I have those different tags. Like you could tag things in terms of this is something I need my computer for. This is something I need my phone for. This is something I can do at only my office. This is something I do at home. You can be that judicious in the process, right? Because that means that if I'm standing in line somewhere and it's going to be, a while, I can look at my to-do list real quick and click on a phone tag, and then I can see all the tasks that I can complete on my phone. Okay, let me knock out a couple, right? Time available. You can set things, you can guess how much time it's going to take you. Energy. I know that a lot of people on these forums and stuff, they'll say this is a high energy task, this is a low energy task. They only schedule their high energy tasks maybe in the morning if that's when they have the most energy. The other concept here, I think we get into it later, but it's called eating your frogs first, which is you do the task that's the worst task of the day first thing in the morning because it's going to take the most willpower to do. So do it first when you've got a reservoir of willpower and then move on, right? And then examples. I already kind of gave some examples. All right. So that should get us through the process of what is the getting things done process, and then how do I set up a program, a suite of programs to help me do that, right? Hopefully this gave an idea of what that kind of looks like, okay? I'll say no, I'll go there now. Yeah, I'll go there now. I'll say another thing that can be important here is the concept of essentialism. And this is going to be a teaser of what these sort of note-taking apps can look like, right? So this is Roam Research. And the reason I'm showing this real quick is just to give you an idea of how I can start to develop I can start to have a place for thought, right? So I know that I've written or listened to something about essentialism. So I look it up, right? Here's a book, Essentialism. Definition, because these notes are in here. They were put in, right? And so I can come in here and say, what is essentialism? Essentialism is about pausing the constant question of, am I investing in the right activities, right? It's about, not about getting more things done. It's about getting the right things done. So I'm going to actually bold that because that's important to me, right? Not getting more things done, but getting the right things done. So now I can see that a little bit more clearly. Essentialism, that concept of being ruthless in your time and making sure you're working on the right thing and not just random things, that's important, right? And that's what this process of engaging is all about, right? It's boiling it down to what are the essential things I need to be working on, not just everything, right? We're going to talk more about this when we get to the Zettelkasten and SmartNote method, okay? I'm hopefully not keeping you past 9:30. I set that time for 7:30, 9:30. We're cruising. We're going a little fast at times, but you guys are brilliant. So I've got 100% faith in you. Zero faith in myself. No. Okay, habit formation. Atomic Habit, Indistractable, wonderful books about this. Okay, habit formation this was pretty mind-boggling to me when I kind of stumbled across this because I think that it's incredibly valuable. So, willpower deletion or ego depletion and willpower issues. So here are 3 things that are going to cause your willpower to plummet. Anytime you have to exhibit self-control, your willpower is plummeting, right? And you have a finite amount of energy to put towards willpower. Anytime you have to make a decision or active choice. And there was a finite difference between what these are. But in essence, anytime you're having to make a decision or anytime you're having to use self-control, you are decreasing your actual reserve of energy to get things done in your day, right? So that's a problem. You shouldn't be relying on that. If you are the type of person that just thinks, I'm just going to power through, I'm going to make sure that I have strong willpower, I'm just going to use that willpower and I'm going to use it like a muscle and I'm going to make it stronger and I'm just going to force myself to make changes all the time, you're going to hit a wall eventually, or you're going to burn out because you're constantly just draining your battery, right? So if you have a process, you can reduce the friction, right? You can reduce these areas creeping up in your day, right? Your process should be intuitive, effortless, customized to you. So once again, a process and positive habits can eliminate the ego depletion occurring, right? You can get ahead of that. Steve Jobs wearing the same thing every day. That's a perfect example. There's a lot of people in minimalism who, in the concept of minimalism, that they have the same t-shirt, same jeans, and that's their closet because they don't want to have that decision in the morning, and they just move forward, right? That's a great example of that. It's an extreme example. The man only ate fruit, for God's sake. But it's a great example, right? It's a great example of trying to reduce friction points in your day through habits, right? Habits by nature are automatic responses to cues. So here now we get into what a habit is, right? Oh, well, we're going to get into a second. This is from Atomic Habits, James Clear, and I thought this was fantastic. If you can make a 1% change every day positively, you're going to, in a year, have a 37% change in that task or that habit or whatever it is. If you make it 1% worse every day, it's only going to, it doesn't get dramatically worse. But the amazing thing is that compounding interest. It's the reason the stock market can be so incredibly useful for your retirement, is its compounding interest. If you are making the right choice, a 1% improvement in your process or in your activities, you are going to have dividends reward at the end of the year, right? So it's about small, tiny process changes to help your habit formation. So this is the habit loop, okay? There is some sort of cue that occurs. It generates some sort of craving. You then have a response, and you get a reward, and then it cycles, right? So for me, maybe I'm sitting down trying to get a project done. It's middle of the day. I'm tired already. The cue is, unfortunately, your environment. There's a lot of concepts about your environment. How much of your environment is a cue? So when I come home from mentoring and I'm tired, walking through that door is a cue for me to go straight to that kitchen. And that's a problem. Because I go to the kitchen and my craving immediately is that I want to grab some sweets off the top shelf. I eat it. That's the response. The reward is I get a dopamine hit. I feel fantastic. I'm cloud nine for a moment and then crash, right? So I had to change that cue, right? So there's different ways you can change that cue, and there can be very extreme ways. There can be, your goal is to cause this loop to go into haywire, right? In order to make positive changes, say you're wanting to build a good habit, a new habit, you want to make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying, right? If you want to eliminate a bad habit, you do the opposite. You make it so that it's not obvious. You make it, disgusting. You make it very hard to accomplish, and you make it very unsatisfying, right? And once again, this is important, I think, in terms of studying. There's an O there. In studying, shortening the feedback loop is very important. You want some sort of reward, not to be, I passed the OCS exam after the residency. If that's your reward, that's a long loop. That's a long response to what you're trying to accomplish. If that reward's that far in the distance, you're not going to keep momentum throughout the year. But if you create these smaller rewards, like I know some people will, when they study, they brew a cup of coffee while they're studying, and it's sort of this, it becomes a reward of when I sit down, only when I sit down to study do I spend money on a Starbucks coffee versus, whatever. So you can create these small little rewards for yourself to accomplish tasks, right? So here are some great examples of sort of how James Clear talks about making things, these different steps. So making it obvious. You change the location. You change the environment. You design the environment around what you're trying to accomplish, etc. Like the clear examples of that would be like, I think in the book they talk about like you put your jogging shoes next to your bed. Like, so when you wake up in the morning, there's your workout clothes already there. Or you sleep in your workout clothes. Or whatever the case is, you're making it very obvious that I'm going to do this now, right? Those kind of things. You put, if you study and you've got your desk here and on the wall behind it, you put exactly, that's where your to-do list, maybe you write it out in the morning and it's right there, right? I'll show my phone. I think I have a picture of what my phone looks like later, like my home screen, and it's very interesting, possibly. I think it's interesting. Maybe it's not. So that's making it obvious, right? Make it attractive. This is the concept of you have temptations built into it, right? Joining a culture where the desired behavior is normal. This is one of the reasons CrossFit's so successful, right? It's because it's attractive to be in that group and be with those people and the behavior, you see that other people are doing it, and so your desire for that is higher, right? You're in a culture that wants that. Hopefully, that's what Brooks is for you. Hopefully that's what your cohort is for you, is that because other people in your cohort are pushing, you're going to feed off that because that tribalism is important, and hopefully that makes it also attractive for you. Oh, that person's super excited about this information. I want to be super excited about this information. That kind of thing. Make it easy. You should not have barriers. For me, the opposite of this, make it hard, is that I should take those snacks and I should put them in a safe or something. That would be the extreme. The other extreme people use is it's like if you end up hitting the couch and doing Netflix every night, you unplug the TV, or you take the TV and you put it in another room and it's unplugged, and now that makes it very hard, right? So now if I want to watch that, I've got to go through 7 steps as opposed to, hey Siri, put on so-and-so, and then you just sit down. My iPad just woke up. That was good. So that might be steps that you have to do, is you make it super easy, you make it super hard, right? Add friction or reduce friction so that you can actually accomplish the task. Make it satisfying. You got to have reinforcements, right? You got to use habit trackers, gamify it. That's one of the things I like doing with my daily habits, is I gamify them. I have an app that I use that it's got a little character. As I do my daily things, it levels up the character. If I fail at doing my tasks, my character gets hurt. It means nothing in the grand scheme of things, but it makes it satisfying to me to click those buttons, right? And have the person do better, right? So I make it satisfying. It's all about controlling the inputs, not the outputs. So, not the outcomes. Stoicism, I don't know if anyone's interested in Stoicism, but there's some really cool books about it. Stoic philosophy is in essence sort of that concept of you focus on what you can control, not on what you can't control. Because the things you can't control, they're a waste of space in your real estate as well, right? So you focus on the things you can control. That's sort of this. It's what are my inputs? What are the things I can control? Let me control them. Let me manage them. And then once again, shorten that feedback loop. Okay, so great. How do you actually stay focused? So you've got the habit. You now sit down and you're like, all right, I'm ready to do this. I've got my to-do list, my projects. I understand now what I need to do. Perfect. This is what I need to do. I'm sitting down. I'm starting to do it. And then what happens is our modern world starts to try to distract you and pull you back in, and they're trying to break you, right? So there's a great book called Make Time. I love it. I think it's a fantastic, easy read. And it's also one of those things that it gives you, like, any book that gives you a formula. Once again, algorithms, I love them. So it really gives you these formulas where it's like, look, here are 50 tips to do this. Here are 50 tips to do this. Try them out. Use the scientific method to figure out which one works for you, etc. So it's really neat. So the idea is that when you sit down, you want to... one second, I got distracted by this one. You want to make sure you're stopped doing the wrong things. You don't want input distraction coming in. It's funny that I got distracted when that popped up. But you want to make sure that you're managing the inputs and the things that are trying to pull your attention, okay? And there are a couple ways to do that. One, first you prioritize what you want to do, but then 2, you use this, right? This is a couple different apps and concepts, and this is the Make Time sort of algorithm, right? And the most important aspect of this make time is this laser part, where this is the laser focus. There's a concept called flow, right? Flow state. And flow state is when you're able to work very effortlessly, right? We've all had it at some point in time where you're working and all of a sudden you enter this state of you're just constantly going. And it's not that you're on a high of excitement. It's not that you're on a low. It's just like nice contentment, right? And there are a lot of, we'll go ahead and pull this up. Once again, I use my notes. I know that I've talked about flow state on here somewhere. Here's flow state. Let's see if there's anything interesting. Myth of multitasking daily routines. How to improve your interest. Nope. There's got to be something on ways to get into flow state, right? Ways to avoid procrastination. Creative triggers for flow. Don't know the problem. And so this is what a SmartNote is. This is a SmartNote app where I can come in here and I can look up an idea. And because everything that I've written about it exists in here, I can then try and find it. So here you go. Here's flow state. And here are things that are going to help enter flow. So the challenge level, there's a balance of challenge level you're looking for. The challenge can't exceed, it needs to exceed your skill, but not be incredibly beyond your skill. That's an important thing. There's a balance there that needs to occur. It needs to be deliberate. Can you develop a video? Blah, 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 blah. How do you know when you're in flow? Conditions to get you into flow. Here you go. You know what to do next. We already talked about that. That's good. You know how to do it. That's important. So maybe you set up steps in your process that you know what's the next project I need to do. What am I needing to read? Here it is. Freedom from distractions. We're going to talk about that more. Clear and immediate feedback, so that you're actually getting that shortened feedback loop and you know that you're actually making progress of some sort. High perceived challenge, but it's not beyond your skills. I think there's more in here. There's this sort of chart. This is, once again, this is a look into my brain and how I kind of organize notes, but these are smart notes. I can come in here and I can look up ideas, right? So you want to enter a flow state here, okay? And that's important. And part of it's that getting rid of distractions. This is an app called Freedom. I have this on, unfortunately it's past 8:30, but I have this on my phone, my iPad, and my computer. During the hours of 8 a.m. to 8:30 p.m., I can't access any news websites, any apps, social apps, any sports things, any entertainment stuff that I've designated. It locks me out. If I was sitting here and I was like, what's happening on ESPN? If I typed in ESPN and it was between those hours, it would show me this big green Freedom thing. It's a subscription-based thing. It's like $2 a month. So worth it to me because it has eliminated that temptation that's just at my fingertips anytime I want it, whether it's my phone, my iPad, anywhere, right? So that's what the Freedom app is. This is a reference to something called a Pomodoro, okay? A Pomodoro, which translates to tomato. The Pomodoro technique is 25 minutes of focused attention followed by a 5-minute break, right? It's a really nice way of helping you do work in small increments, okay? And this also goes to planning your day and you're planning your projects. Instead of saying something like, I'm going to read all of that anatomy chapter this evening, and then you block off 2 hours, one, you might fatigue out if you're just constantly reading through it. Two, you don't know if you're going to complete that task in 2 hours. So now 2 hours go by. Maybe you learned a ton, but because you set the marker as I'm going to complete that chapter, now you feel discouraged because you didn't accomplish it. As opposed to, I'm going to work through that chapter this evening, and I'm going to do 3 Pomodoros of working through it, which means I'm going to do 3 25-minute bursts of focus with little 5-minute breaks in between. Right? And there's little apps. This is an app called Forest, I think, where on your phone it sets a timer, and while the timer's there, it locks your phone. You can't do anything but watch this little tree grow for 25 minutes, right? So it's another way of I'm eliminating distractions. Because one of the other things, I think it's in this, I'm sure it's in this flow state thing, that when you get knocked out of flow state, it takes 10 minutes for you to get back into that flow state, right? So if you allow distractions to come in, oh, what's that? What's going on over here? You're derailed. You've lost all that connective, intention that you had. Okay. Perkins' law, we already talked about that one. That was the idea of the tasks will expand to the time you give them. Here's my phone. This is my phone. I took a screenshot yesterday. The apple, that was a tomato. That was the Pomodoro. So if I open my phone, I don't get any notifications. Like, I turned off all the notifications. This is one notifications for, I think, Marco Polo, because the only people at Marco Polo are me and my wife with the kids. That's it. So I know that's a fun little treat. But I turned off all my notifications. I don't get email notifications. I have a designated time that I'm going to do that. Here's my daily habit tracker. So these are the things I want to accomplish. If it's orange, I probably haven't been doing it as consistently. If it's blue, I'm doing it very consistently, right? So I know the things that I want to accomplish every day. And then here's my little task list, right? Some of these I made up just to have on here to make it nice. So I know, okay, these are the things I need to do today. These are my priority ones. Weekly review with my family, because I do a weekly review not just for myself, but I sit down with my wife and we do a weekly review for what are we doing as a group, right, for the week. And then other things I might need to do by priority. I wish I was buying a ticket to Hawaii. And then, once again, like I said, my daily habits. You won't see any social media apps on here. I don't need it on my phone. I have my phone with me all the time. I don't need that kind of distraction. That's going to, crush my productivity, right? So this is my setup. And then I've already talked about, these are the apps that I use, and we already talked about the email filters, right? Perfect. I think this is another great little feedback quote. Long-term goals are useful for orienting you in the right direction, but hard to enjoy. And tasks are very necessary to get things done, but without a focal point in the distance, you get in this just, I gotta complete, and you lose your rudder, right? Where am I going? All right, so that's a little brief concept on how to develop habits. Now let's talk about best methods for learning, right? This is, I think, the final push. We're almost through it, guys. Hopefully this is enjoyable. I could talk about this all night. That'd be a problem. All right, so big picture for learning, okay? You've got your working and your long-term memory, right? Working memory, this is that you have 4 slots of information that you can hold currently. That's that when I'm focusing, I can only hold 4 sort of bits of information, right? Long-term memory is my actual hard drive that I can put things into my hard drive, obviously, but it takes effort to get it from a working point into my hard drive. The best way to do that is chunking, okay? If I can chunk information, I'm going to be able to use that information much more effectively, right? Chunking is taking lots of bits of information that have some sort of relation, putting them together, and then creating in essence, in your brain, those neurons are connected so that when you fire one, you fire them all sort of together. You're chunking that information so it's more relevant. What's amazing about that is that if I've only got 4 slots to be able to hold information in my working memory, those 4 slots don't have to be individual data. They can be a chunk that exists in one of those slots. So if I can chunk information and then create that chunk to get bigger and bigger, now I can hold big ideas in my head simultaneously and work on them, as opposed to 4 finite granular data points, right? The only way you're going to chunk is first you got to understand the context of it. I think I have it in here somewhere. Yeah, you got to have the context both up and down. You got to understand it fully. All right, you have to eliminate the illusion of understanding. We'll talk about that in a second as well. It's very easy to have the illusion of knowledge, right? And there are ways to check yourself to make sure you don't have an illusion of knowledge, but you actually understand it, okay? And then the other big thing is if you want to really chunk, we talked about this at the very beginning, you want to engage diffuse mode. You want to actually start linking chunks together, and the way you do that is you go into diffuse mode, right? And what they talk about in that learning how to learn is that and this can be beneficial doing Pomodoros as well, is that you do 25 minutes of focused, and then maybe you do 5-10 minute walk, or 5-10 minute little exercise at your desk, or something that you're not having to focus. Don't go do like another project. Don't go do like a home project where you're trying to figure something out, because now your brain is focused again. You want your brain to just sort of mellow out and think about what you were just kind of doing, but more in that back diffuse. So maybe you go for a walk. I'm going to do 5-minute walk. I'm just kind of walking meditation. Things are starting to happen, that kind of thing. It can be very important for connecting those chunks, right? And that then creates a bigger chunk. So this book, Ultra Learning, has a really good sort of like framework as well for kind of how do I learn information. The first one is I scope the topic. This is if you've ever sat down and if you go back to like textbook reading, like if you just read textbooks from cover to cover, then you've never scoped the topic. It's the scoping the topic would be, all right, I'm going to open up this chapter and I'm going to read all the subheadings, the major headings. I'm just going to think about what that means. Why do they have these subheadings? And you're getting an idea of what's happening, right? Because when it comes to information, that information is either going to be a concept, which is sort of like, a concept is sort of, more like indirect learning, or not indirect learning, an idea, sort of a nebulous idea. You have individual sort of didactic facts, and then you might have procedures, right? Like the hands-on of how things actually happen, right? And it's a combination of those three things that makes you understand sort of that information eventually. So being able to scope what are the concepts, what are the facts, what are the procedures that I'm going to need, and why does this all matter before you actually get into studying, that can be incredibly beneficial. It's like building a scaffolding and then actually starting to put things on that scaffolding, right? If I don't have a plan in place and I just start throwing data around and hoping that it makes sense to me eventually, that's not as helpful as building a scaffold first, build a foundation of some sort, and then put things on it, right? Flow state, we already talked about this. You want to get into a flow state. You want to be undistracted. You want to be focused, right? Directness. I thought this was, directness is, they talk about it a little bit in terms of, here, once again, let's just go there. Directness. Directness from Ultra Learning. Here you go. You just need to do it, right? And so this would be like one example they give in directness is like if I was going to learn a language, I just go to that country, or I find someone who is a speaker of that, and I just go straight to them and I start talking. Like there's a direct, like I am engaging in that activity. I am prioritizing that effort. I'm not tiptoeing around. I'm getting right into it, right? You are actually engaging in that, right? So it's that idea of directness. Projects are a good example of being direct. By having a project, it forces you to be direct in terms of that information and engaging in that information. Deliberate practice. So there's a lot of times that people study, but their study methods aren't focused, deliberate learning, okay? Usually what you'll see people do is they'll reread, they'll highlight information, they'll quiz themselves, but the way they quiz themselves is it's like almost like yes or no answered questions or multiple choice questions and things like that. All of those things are poor learning styles, because what they do is they are allowing you to have the illusion of knowledge because you've seen that information and that you reread something and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Or you see that highlight and it feels good to highlight. Oh yeah, I'm saving that information. And you highlight it, but then you're not actually doing something with that information to learn it. Or the other one, like quizzing, eventually we've all been there in terms of like you create a flashcard and it has a question on the front, A, B, and C, D, and it's A, and eventually you just see the front of the card and you immediately know it's A. And you don't have to know, you don't even have to read it. You're not making an association. You're not playing with that information at all to understand was it A, B, C, or D and why it would be A. You just know, oh, A, and you move on to the next card. That's an illusion of knowledge, right? Rereading something and having it refresh your memory, and that memory is just very surface, and you feel good about it, that's an illusion of knowledge. You need to be very deliberate in your practice, which takes a lot more effort, but it's more rewarding in the long term. And so there are different things like spaced repetition, interleaving, using mnemonics, and we'll talk about those a little bit in a moment, right? Testing yourself. You have to test yourself, but you have to test yourself in a way that, once again, you don't have the illusion of knowledge. Active recall, right? Active recall is I have more of a open-ended, big picture question, and I have to pull all of this information together. Active recall is important because there's this concept called the forgetting curve. Let's go ahead and pull it up. I'll pull it up here because there's probably a graph that I can use. Here we go. This is good. So the forgetting curve is this idea of memorization, right? Where normally if I remember something, I know it 100% here, and then over, 6 days, I completely forget it, right? Possibly, right? If it's a really challenging bit of information that I tried to learn, boop, my brain is not going to hold it, right? So what happens is if I can actively recall that information in an appropriate interval of time, I can start to flatten out that curve. So if this is the information and I never touch that information again, in 6 days, odds are it's gone. But if I touch it the next day, if the next time I study it is tomorrow, well, in 6 days then, I might know 25% of it. That's not bad, right? And then if I touch it again, 3 days later, usually it's like you touch it here and then you touch it again 3 days later, and the space between, this is the spaced repetition, the space between touching that information gets wider and wider because it forces me to actively recall it every time. Because if I did it every day, eventually I'm not actively recalling. It's still in my surface memory. I have to kind of forget some of it, and then I have to bring it back forward. And eventually you flatten this curve to where the spaced repetition might be like 6 months. So then that information, you only have to refresh it every 6 months, but it's there for you, right? That's the forgetting curve. And that's the idea of what spaced repetition and active recall, how those kind of meld together. The Feynman method, Feynman was this very famous physicist. And what he was known for is he was an amazing teacher. He was an expert teacher. And the reason he was an expert teacher is because he used something called the Feynman method, which was the idea that you try to teach information to a like a 5-year-old, right? Let's see, Feynman method. And the idea would be, let's see if I have the actual steps. I don't know if I have the actual steps in here. The steps would be something like you take that information and you start to try and talk and explain it to someone, right? And you do it out loud to yourself. Anytime you hit a technical word, you then have to describe what that technical word means until you're not using technical terminology to explain that. If you ever hit a point where you can't do that, you say the word neuroplasticity and you're like, well, how do I explain neuroplasticity? If you can't, you have to take a step back and go look up that word and really feel like you could explain that word without saying the word. Because the goal would be, the Feynman method is you could explain a concept without using any technical terms at all, and the concept and the understanding of it is sound. That's Feynman method, right? That's also the concept of elaboration, right? Same kind of idea. You're able to elaborate. External feedback. Don't dodge punches, right? Ego is the enemy. Ego is the enemy. The ego is going to get in your way if you allow yourself to be sensitive to feedback. That's a problem, right? In Grit, they talk about how, in the book Grit, they talk about how when you're first developing an interest, positive feedback is important. Because when you're developing an interest, you need positive feedback. Oh, I feel like I'm pretty good at this, to develop a passion for that interest, right? Once you develop a passion for an interest, you now need negative feedback so that you can make sure that you are constructive in your learning. Because the negative feedback or constructive feedback is going to point out the areas that you're having issues with, because that's where you need to be studying. Deliberate practice is not studying the thing you're great at all the time because you're great at it. It's studying, if this is all the things that I'm doing in physical therapy, I need to study this so that I can bring it up to here, and then I can study this, and then I can study this, so that they're all moving upwards. If I'm just studying this one all the time, I'm just getting really good at that, but I have holes, right? So I need to be deliberate in studying the things that are my weaknesses, and I need external feedback to help me know what my weaknesses are. And I need to embrace that. Otherwise, I'm not going to get better, right? And then experimentation. There's a concept of Kolb's theory of learning. And part of it is that you have an idea and then you experiment with that idea, you play with it. There's got to be an element of play in your learning because it's going to help you enjoy it, one, but then also refine and understand ideas more. Okay? Learn in Public, there's another great book called Show Your Work. The more you learn in public, the more of a sort of contract you're putting out there that is forcing you to keep up with the actual learning process. That's why cohort-based learning is so important. That's why I think that you need to make sure that you are developing those relationships with your cohort. They don't have to be that you're best friends. They can be professional relationships, but they should be professional relationships that are helping you grow, right? All right, Smart Notes. We're not going to make it under 9:30. If you got to go at 9:30, I am recording this, so totally get it. So if you start dropping off and I'm just talking to myself while I'm finishing the recording, I'm okay with that. It's not the first time I've talked to myself and recorded. So why Smart Notes? So you've already kind of seen it a little bit, right? I was floating around in my Rome Research sort of Smart Notes thing. But the idea is that digital Smart Notes, one, it's a personal knowledge management app. It's a repository. It's in essence it's like a sketch pad, right? It's a sketch pad of ideas, free flowing, but with connectivity, right? So you're making links. It's almost like using that diffuse learning, and that it's another way of putting that diffuse and deliberate or focused learning into an application so that I actually learn. It's open-ended. You know, I just throw ideas in there all the time, and then I see where connections occur. You can add multimedia. I've got images, pictures, etc. that are in there tied to my ideas. It's going to be a database. It's durable, etc., etc. I'll skip through some of these. So what are Smart Notes, Zettelkasten method, Evergreen Notes? These are all sort of, you'll see these terms, and they're synonymous in my brain, right? They're synonymous in terms of what they are, okay? It's a way of consuming information and digitizing your learning and what you've learned and putting them in nice little packages that you can then connect over time, right? We already talked about this. Perfect. Look, we're ahead of the game. None of these promote learning. None of these promote serendipity. That's a big one for me. You know, not only is it a great John Cusack movie, but it's an idea that I want learning to happen spontaneously. I want ideas and connections to happen spontaneously. That's that diffuse learning. And using a Smart Notes, Zettelkasten, Evergreen method can do that, right? So, Smart Notes, in essence, what it is you're going to have multiple notes that you're putting in place. Fleeting ideas. If I just have an idea, I put it in here. So let me just go ahead and do some Smart Notes. So here's my daily notes page, right? So I can come in here and I can just say, I don't know, we'll put Steve Jobs wore the same thing every day. It eliminated decision making, right? So now here's the thing. I can take this and I can make a page out of it. I can take decision making, and I know that's already a page. What this has done is that this has linked the concepts of Steve Jobs and decision making. So that if I ever then go into my Steve Jobs page, I can see, oh yeah, May 10th, I was talking about him and decision making. If I ever go into my decision making page, I can say, oh yeah, Steve Jobs did that. Make It Stick was all about decision making and the illusion of mastery, what was that? Illusion of mastery, poor metacognition, etc. It's interesting. Maybe I make a connection, right? What this starts to do is you end up with something like this. This was my sort of thought process of trying to figure out this course, right? And so I started off with resources. And what I started doing is just writing down things that I was like, what are some resources that tie into these areas? And you can see that I can shift click on any of these and pull up that whole article. And then I can say, oh, yep, that's a good idea. And over here, let me close all this so that it's a little bit more manageable. I can come over here and say, oh, that's a great idea. I want to use that later. I can drag and drop it right there. And so it's now tagged in here. Oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to grab that. And I start just compiling ideas. And these are all just notes I took in the past. But they start coming together when I have an idea or a thought on what I want to actually start looking up, right? And so by having this repository of just stuff, over time, I can actually use that stuff. I'm leveraging this information. Here you can see that I kind of created this outline, reasons you need to have a system. And in here, I've got all these just random thoughts that I had or that I pulled, and I can click on these and I can see where that come from. Building a second brain. He talked about 3 benefits of the second brain. That's cool. Didn't make the PowerPoint, but that's cool. You can prioritize. I can see, and also, this ties into this other concept right here, which is progressive summarization, right? Progressive summarization is that first I put a note in. I just create a note. Then I bold some of the passages that I think are relevant. Then I highlight within those bolded sections that I think are informational. Then maybe I put a summary. And then eventually I create something of my own, and I create these permanent notes. And that progressive summarization allows me to look at something like this and see irrational and unresolvable. What's that? Creates irrational and unresolvable pressure. That makes sense. And I can start to look in here and say, what was I thinking about when I was reading those? If I go to the book Make Time, I don't know if I've... Mate Time. That's not good. If I come to Make Time, I can see all these notes I took. Now, I didn't do progressive summarization on this, and that's okay. You don't have to do it every time. Once again, that's the concept of like when you're being a good curator, I don't want to become just a collector. Maybe I'll process this when I get to it, right? When it's time to actually look through this, then I maybe process it and do the sort of like progressive summarization. And I highlight the things I care about and I bold the things I care about, right? So this becomes like an external brain for me. I can play around here and I can think. And the other cool thing is that I can come in here and you can create little templates so you're not having to like work as hard, right? So I can do this, JJ, I can hit daily, and it's going to populate a daily journal for me, right? And I built this out myself, super quick, it doesn't take any time. And now I have these daily questions that I can ask. And these are like Stoic philosophy questions, right? Maybe I do that in the morning, if I want to. Or I read a book. What's a good book? Somebody give me a book title. Let's do... No one's doing anything, so I'm doing Harry Potter. It's not the actual book title, but I'm just doing it. So say I create a book, and I come in here and I do JJ, and I say it's a book. And now I have this, and I can put, okay, this is J.K. Rowling's. I don't know how to spell the name. Rawlings. I'm sorry, this was ahead of my time. But now, if I have other books by her, they're connected. You'll see that I have tons of Peter Attia is a podcast I love. Here's all the hosting podcasts he's done. I can go into these podcasts and I can play around and look at them. There was one, I think, by Irene Davis that I really liked. No, that's not the one. I haven't done notes on that one yet. But there's some of these I did lots of notes on, etc. So it becomes a repository for my thinking, right? And I start to create notes. What an Evernote or a SmartNote ends up being is that if I look up, once again, this is a great example because I don't know the guy's name. Andy, there it is, Marschuk. I'm not going to pronounce that correct. If I go to this guy and I go to his, he has an article somewhere. Evergreen notes should be atomic? Is that his? Yeah, sure. This is his note system. This talks about what evergreen notes are, right? And I'll take it and I'll link it and I'll just send it to you guys, right? So you can take a look at this. But this is a beautiful little website. Because what it talks about an evergreen note is once you've got a concept, the note itself should be a very finite concept. It should be atomic. It should be concept-oriented, densely linked and packed, and then it should be in some sort of hierarchy, right? And so now when you look at this guy's notes, and these are beautiful in terms of like structure, is that the notes themselves are direct, definitive concepts. Most people take only transient notes. That's a concept, and here is the note. And then that is linked to other notes. Knowledge work should accrete. And then here's a note to that. And you end up having this connection of ideas, but whenever I want to create something, I can just link these ideas together. And this works in physical therapy. You could have these be physical therapy concepts, right? So you end up having this collection of notes. Here are the concepts behind a SmartNote. You should be capturing one idea very concisely, connect that idea. So like example for me, if I type E, Is it E? Yeah, these are Evernote ideas that I kind of came up with. And so if I have an E colon, that is quote unquote for me an Evernote. That's now a concept that I feel is very solid, right? But there's a process. And then you connect them. And so I've kind of already shown you how I've connected through context these smart notes. But eventually the idea is that these smart notes work for you, right? You're able to create effortlessly. This PowerPoint presentation you're watching right now, a lot of these ideas have been in my head. I created this PowerPoint on Saturday. I created this whole page that had all those notes on it Saturday. And it didn't take me a ton of time because I just took ideas and I dropped them where I wanted, and then I created the PowerPoint. Maybe it shows that I created it Saturday. I'm not sure. There's not a lot of animations and stuff, but the concepts there are they just came out, right? And so these are programs that do this sort of smart note application, right? There's Roam Research, which is the one I'm using. There's Obsidian, which some of the reason people love Obsidian is because it is not a online cloud-based database. It is solely on your computer, and therefore all of your data is being saved at home on your computer, and some people love that. And Rim Notes, some people love Rim Notes, especially students, because you can take any sort of note that you create and turn it into a flashcard immediately, just by the way you type it out. And then built into that, there is spaced repetition algorithms. So this means that you don't have to use an outside spaced repetition program, which is what this is. So this is Anki cards. And this is my quizzing active recall method of choice. Okay? What it is, I'm going to stop this PowerPoint real quick, just for a hot second, and pull up my Anki notes and share my Anki. This is on my phone, on my computer, and on my iPad. And this is my Anki notes or my flashcards, right? What this does is that I create flashcards, and you shouldn't be creating flashcards in this application. You should be creating them somewhere else and then just dumping them in here, because there's a lot easier ways to just quickly make flashcards, right? So I make flashcards. I'm studying for dry needling right now because I took the CEUs. And so all of these are different videos that I watched from the instructor or whatever the case might be, right? I create all these flashcards. If I click on this deck, if I click on the deck itself, let me browse. If I click on this deck, you can see there's this many flashcards. I click on this one, there's a ton. Each one of these has just tons and tons of flashcards, right? Tons and tons of flashcards. I don't know if you saw that because it popped up a second window. Sorry. So what that ends up doing for me, though, is that each one of these has a ton of flashcards, but the application tells me when it's time to study which flashcard, because I don't need to be studying them all every day, or else I'm not going to be using the forgetting curve the way it's designed, right? I want to take this information and put it into my long-term memory. So I create flashcards that are not flashcards that I can easily recognize the answer. They need to be concepts that I need to grasp. And then what I do is when I answer them, so let me just go ahead and I'll just pull one up. Let's do study now. If I look at this, right, neuropathic mechanisms, signs and symptoms, possible interventions, and I verbalize it, I say it out loud, and then when I show the answer, I can read it, and I have to now say, did I do good? Was it easy? And on my phone, there's actually 4 in the sense of, was it hard? Was it easy? Was it crazy easy? Or was it, do I need to do it again? By clicking this, the application is going to show me this flashcard again at the appropriate time. I don't have to worry about that. So now what I do is I set a Pomodoro, 25 minutes, and I sit down and I knock out flashcards, right? Because I've already done all the pre-work. So 25 minutes, focused flashcards, I'm learning the stuff I need to learn, right? Interleaving is the concept of I study things that are similar to each other, but not the exact same topic. So instead of going into these flashcard decks individually, I go into the giant pool of them. And now it's forcing me to think about concepts from muscle pain and concepts from pain neuromatrix simultaneously, right? Because I'm going from flashcard to flashcard. So it's interleaving. They are topics that are similar, but they're not the exact same. That's going to reinforce learning, right? So this app is fantastic for that. What I do is I would use this app, and then I would use this in conjunction with creating mind maps. I would then, after I've done this, I would sit down and I would take the concepts behind pain neuromatrix science, and I would create a mind map where I'm linking things, because then that gives me a big overview of all these concepts I've just learned. How do they actually connect in my brain for me, right? Sure. We're back there? Yep, we're back there. So that's how I use Feynman method. Mind mapping should have been one of these buckets. Active recall, interleaving, spaced repetition, all of these get tied into just using something like Anki, or if you use RIM notes, something like RIM notes, right? And people that use RIM notes love it because it has spaced repetition, and I think that you can export RIM notes flashcards into Anki if you'd still like to use the Anki format. So reflect on this process. I talked about a lot of stuff tonight. I know there's a river of information, a river of pain maybe for some. So I talked about a lot of stuff. And, the app I use is Scapple for mind mapping. On iPhones, there's one called Muse, or on iPads, there's one called Muse. Muse is, I think, a subscription, though. Scapple was a one-time fee. I love it. I think it's really easy. But it's only on my desktop, so I can only do it when I'm on my desktop. So think about this process, reflect on it. I'll send out this I'll send out this video to everybody who was on the original email, but also send out the PowerPoint when I do that. Here are resources. Here are the books that I've kind of read that I got a lot of these ideas from. Here are if there's a website called Skillshare. Those that don't know about it, Skillshare is in essence like Netflix for just learning stuff from other just people, and it's a pretty cool website, and usually you can find an affiliate link for it that gives you 2 months free, and usually you can get through any course in 2 months, and to be honest, in 2 months you're not going to be able to just browse Skillshare anyways because you're all going to be in the residency. So what Skillshare, there's 2 courses. One, this guy, Thomas Frank, has a productivity masterclass. He goes through a lot of this concept that we talked about today. Also, Ali Abdaal goes through it. Tiago Forte, he has his Forte Labs. He's the guy that teaches the course on building a second brain, but he's got a lot of blog posts about some of these ideas because maybe I didn't explain it well. Maybe I kind of touched on it and it kind of, scratched, it put an idea in your head, but you need to scratch it a little bit more. Totally get it. Here's a book on Smart Notes, which was the last thing we started talking about. Great book. And once again, there's a ton of resources on learning and habits and productivity. And then this Coursera course is free, and it's the learning how to learn, and it goes through more of that sort of like what's the brain actually doing with information. So there's some just really fun resources here. I'm losing my voice now. I think we've done a good job. Thank you all for hanging in there. I will end this recording.